Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 91, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. Hope you all are having a great week. Quick reminder, Best of Charleston final voting is open through March 8th. Can you believe it's March already? I know I just said March 1st at the top of the show. We're 2 months in already to the year. We only have a week left to vote for Best of Charleston. You can go to bestof.charlestoncitypaper.com. Vote for all your favorites. Holy City Center is up in the Twitter, website, Instagram, and social media influencer category. I would appreciate your votes if you so choose. I also wanted to give a quick update. I was talking in the last episode about my birthday weekend, all the fun I had, and things like that. And I neglected to mention that one of my friends, Lori DiNicola, who works for Petaloso, which is a floral company. She does events like weddings and has worked on productions and things like that. She also is heavily involved in some charities, including the American Lung Association. Any event, a good friend of mine, and she knows my love of ice cream. And she had Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream delivered to me, a couple pints complete with sprinkles and waffle cone pieces. So I really appreciated that and wanted to mention it because one, it was super nice of her, and two, in case you didn't know, yeah, you can have Jenny's delivered to your home, and you can also, in addition to whatever ice cream you order, you can get any of the accoutrements that go with it if you like. I like to make ice cream sound fancier than it is because I love it so much. And speaking of Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams, you may remember in a previous episode I mentioned how they are partnering with Warner Brothers to release a Ted Lasso themed flavor, and that was called Biscuits with the Boss. If you're familiar with the show, you know exactly what that reference is to. And I was lucky enough to have someone from Jenny's let me know about that information so I could share it, of course. But then they offered to send me some of the ice cream. It doesn't officially come out until tomorrow, March 2nd, but I received it late last week. So I got an early taste, and let me tell you, it is delicious. It's awesome whether you like Ted Lasso or not. The flavor features shortbread cookie crumbles and salted butter sweet cream ice cream, just a great mix of sweet and salty, and it is so good. I had to force myself to put it back in the freezer before I finished the whole pint. But yeah, I definitely recommend that flavor again, whether you know anything about the show or not. And thanks to Jenny's for sending that to me. That was great. I For those who are fans of Ted Lasso, the next season, which is the third, starts streaming on March 15th on Apple TV Plus. If you want to try that ice cream, as I mentioned, it will be available in scoop shops nationwide beginning on March 2nd, which is tomorrow. The local Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream shop can be found at 501A King Street. All right. Enough of me and my life. Let's move on to the top stories. And this is a pretty significant story that the Post and Courier shared. Again, link is in the bio. Not the bio, I'm sorry. Link is in the show notes. I'm so used to like Instagram and Twitter and social media. Link in the bio. In the show notes, whatever platform you're listening on, I highly, highly recommend that you go read the full article. It includes all sorts of information about this study regarding gun violence and gun thefts, specifically here in South Carolina. A lot of interesting information in there, some that you won't be surprised by, but I'll highlight some of it here. But definitely go check out the full piece if you have a chance. So here's some of the big highlights from this piece that the Post and Courier put out. It has been determined that South Carolina in the past 5 years has experienced the fourth highest rate of personally reported gun thefts in the country. This is all part of a huge national report that was released this month on guns used in crimes. Stolen firearms are being used more often in U.S. gun crimes, so not just here in South Carolina, but across the whole country. This report examined firearms recovered in crimes by local, state, and national law enforcement between 2017 and 2021. The report, which was released by the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, is offering up the most comprehensive data on firearm information that we've had in the last 2 decades or so. There hasn't been a ton of these types of studies, and this is super comprehensive and is getting, as a country who wildly disagrees on what should be done about gun violence, this is providing some insight into things that might help stop some of these crimes. You're never going to stop all gun violence, of course, But this is providing some insight into how people are getting guns and what types of guns are being used in crime. So let's go in some further so you can see what I'm talking about. So in 2021, firearms were used in more than 85% of South Carolina's murders, which increased to levels unseen since 1995, the Post and Courier said, using data compiled by the State Law Enforcement Division, aka SLED. So that's right. Last year, or I'm sorry, 2 years ago, 2021, 85% of murders involve guns. There's a reason for that. It's easier to kill people with guns than other weapons. I mean, that's a no brainer. So, no surprise there. In 2022, law enforcement agencies in cities, including Charleston, North Charleston, and Columbia, have reported that there have been decreases in fatal shootings compared to 2021. So that's good that we've seen a decrease from 2021 to 2022. But obviously, vast majority of murders are still involving guns, and the crime is still too high. Now, back to that national report, it also found that there is a shrinking time window between when a gun is legally purchased and when it is then used in a crime. This suggests that weapons are changing hands faster and that it's becoming even easier for people with criminal intent to get their hands on guns. Again, a no brainer. As we're seeing more and more lax gun laws, including here, we already have lax gun laws and they're trying to pass even more. Obviously, you're putting more guns out there, and that alone is going to lead to more crimes because there's just simply more out there. So, in addition to that, once people have guns, they're not taking good enough care of them, which you're going to hear here in a moment. And that's how we're going from someone who can legally purchase a gun to all of a sudden, very quickly, someone else has that gun and they're using it in a crime. So, how are people getting guns when they're not supposed to? There's all sorts of ways, of course, but obviously the biggest thing is theft. More than 1 million firearms were reported stolen in the US between 2017 and 2021. And this report described theft as a significant contributor to gun violence. It is right there in this report. People who are not securing their guns, not doing a good enough job of making sure their guns are safe and are not easily stolen. Obviously, because they're not doing a good enough job, those guns are being stolen and then they're being used in crimes. It's right there in the report. It's a funny thing about numbers and studies, reputable ones anyway, because we all know you can go search fake studies on the internet. But the funny thing about reputable studies and data and numbers, they don't lie. People can manipulate data, they can twist numbers and leave out information. But this shows right here that people who are not keeping their guns safe, the so called good guys with guns, the legal gun owners who do all the right things, are not protecting the weapons when they're not holstered on them on their person. They're not locking them up, they're leaving them in cars, whatever it may be. So people are stealing them and using them in crimes. It is a direct contributor to gun violence. More than half of those million firearms thefts that I mentioned occurred in the South, where, no surprise, we have the most lax gun laws. South Carolina trailed just Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana when it came to the highest rates of reported private gun thefts. So here in the Palmetto State, an average of 7,825 guns were reported stolen annually by private individuals. That means about 151 gun theft victims for every 100,000 people. Obviously, gun theft provides an avenue for people legally prohibited from carrying a weapon to procure one. This is an argument you hear a lot when people start talking about gun laws. Oh, this is just going to punish the good people. Criminals are always going to find a way to break the law. Yeah, no kidding, but you have to have laws. So you can't just like throw your hands up in the air and go, nah, forget it. They're going to find a way. Don't make it easy for people. And there are laws that don't infringe on your Second Amendment rights, such as laws about how you're supposed to store your guns. Other states have it. South Carolina has absolutely no laws on the books about how a gun should be secured, in a home, in a car, whatever it may be. Again, you see this in the news all the time. There's been several reports. You can go search for it on our local news where guns are constantly being stolen out of cars. People are just leaving them in their cars. They're not secured in any way, shape, or form. They're not locked up. Yeah, you can lock your car, but it's easy to break into a car if you really want to. You can just break the damn glass, swipe the gun, and you're out of there. All right, back to the study. Obviously, you can tell I'm passionate about this stuff, and gun violence just drives me nuts. And the arguments and the inability to do anything even reasonable just drives me crazy. Columbia and North Charleston were among the top 5 cities in the country with the highest rates of gun thefts from cars within the past decade. This is according to a different study done by Everytown, who did analysis of data that was reported to the FBI. The popularity of guns in the South, of course, is a big, you know, factor here. But also permissive gun carrying laws also help explain why this part of the country has reported the most thefts. South Carolina, as I mentioned, doesn't require any kind of secure, they don't have any laws about securing your gun. But on top of that, South Carolina does not require people to register their weapon or report a stolen firearm. So those numbers we just talked about, those are just based on people who reported it stolen because they did the right thing. They had a gun, it was stolen. They wanted the police to know, so hopefully it'd be recovered. So hopefully it wouldn't be used in a violent crime. So number one, so no one would be hurt. But number two, if unfortunately it wasn't recovered and it was used in a violent crime, the owner doesn't want that to come back on them and be like, hey, we found your gun in a crime and you're a suspect now. They did the right thing and reported it. And we're still number 4 in the country. So think about all the guns that were not reported because there's no requirement to do so. Again, there are simple things that we don't even have to get into a debate about Second Amendment. I know there's a lot of debate about what laws you can and can't enact, what people think infringes on their right. Having a law about how you should secure your gun and having a law about you have to report your gun that it was stolen in a certain amount of time does not infringe on those Second Amendment rights. And these things can help to reduce violent crime. There is no reason not to have these types of legislations. Then we can go on and debate the more complicated things. These are easy and they have nothing to do with restricting your right to get a gun. But any legislation, any suggestion of any kind of law of this nature is immediately shot down by one side. They don't even want to hear it. But here's the thing, this report is showing where these guns are coming from, how people are getting them, and it's clear as day that there are simple solutions to immediately start reducing some of these. Yes, of course, there's still going to be violent crime involving guns. Of course, guns are still going to be stolen. But why make it easy? Why? There is no reason to do that. Just stop for a second. Just because someone is suggesting, hey, maybe we should change some laws, don't immediately assume someone's coming to get my guns. There are plenty of things you can do that have nothing to do with restricting people from purchasing, legally purchasing guns. There's, like I just mentioned, I've said it several times now. There's no reason not to pass that. People just are stubborn about it and don't even want to, and that's people in the public. Politicians are afraid in certain parts of this state. Even if they agree, I bet you they wouldn't even say it because they're afraid. Again, anything involving guns, even if it has nothing to do with restricting someone's right to purchase one, like a how you should secure your gun thing, even mentioning something adjacent to restricting guns, people lose their minds over it. And they're afraid it's going to be misconstrued. And so none of these things get passed. Well, I am hopeful that although this ridiculous law about permitless carry in South Carolina might get passed, where you do not need a permit and you also don't need any even basic safety training. Obviously, this is only going to make this issue worse because again, more people are going to be able to get guns. They're going to be able to get them easier in addition to thefts and all that stuff, since you're not changing any of those legislation about how you need to secure your gun, people aren't going to be required to have safety training. So they're going to make dumber mistakes. They may harm themselves, they may harm others, and they may not properly store their weapons, making it even easier for people to steal their weapons and use them in violent crimes. It's only going to get worse. Yes, thankfully, in that legislation, there was some compromise. And if it does pass, one of the amendments they added was that there will be a requirement in the state to report a stolen weapon within, I think it was 30 days, is the proposal. That's good. That is one step in the right direction. I wish it wasn't added as an amendment to a bill where we're going to make it easier for people to get guns and also make it so they don't have to have any training or a permit to carry the guns. Because you take one step forward with the requiring people to report a stolen weapon, and then you take several steps back with the main point of the legislation. So you know it is how it is in the state, unfortunately. So again, it's a tricky thing with data and numbers. As I mentioned, it doesn't lie. When you look at this report, when you look at the numbers, it's clear a big part of the problem is guns being stolen. And there are ways to prevent that from happening that do not even come close to infringing on anyone's rights. We need to do something. We've talked about this a million times. I know a lot of you agree with me. And again, this has nothing to do with stopping people who can legally own guns from owning them. It's not making it more difficult for those people to get guns. There are ways to do this that can immediately reduce crime. We need to let people, we need to push our politicians to pass those and stop passing all this other legislation that just negates any progress you make. In any event, please go read that article. Don't take my word for it. I'm picking out sections of this report that I thought were interesting, that I thought were important. You might find something else in there. Go look at it. It's a lot of information. From guns to God. The Charleston County School District approved the first reading of a change to a policy that involves school board meetings that would allow a school board member the opportunity to volunteer to open special or regular board meetings with a prayer. We talked about this previously. A lot of these new folks who have been added to school boards after the last election are blurring lines between church and state in many ways, and doing all sorts of things involving, or attempting, I should say, to do all sorts of things about what can and can't be taught in schools. But this is another one. For whatever reason, they thought it was a priority to allow prayer in school board meetings. I mean, okay, whatever. Like, if you want to pray, go wild. That's your right. Religious freedom in this country, and pray whenever you want, wherever you want. But what was the point of making this policy change? I don't understand. You are a school board district. You work, well, not in the school, but you work on policies and things involving the schools in your district. What does this have to do with anything? So, the revision to this policy would state that board members may volunteer to open, as I mentioned, a special or regular board meeting with a prayer. But the prayer does have to comply with state law, and it also has to apply with a former ruling of a Fourth Circuit of Appeals case that has a few different stipulations about like what can be said in the prayer. One of the stipulations is that the term God can be used, or Almighty God can be used, but that's it. No other names for God can be used. It can only be those two. The prayer is also supposed to not be specific to any one religious denomination. Of course, if you're mentioning God or the Almighty God, those are terms that certain religions don't use. So you're already I don't see how this can be not specific to a certain denomination if you're using terms that are only specific to certain denominations. But okay, you're going to force the non-Christians to just be like, all right, well, they're saying God. I use a different term, or maybe they're atheists and they don't pray. So it's already an issue. But again, religious freedom. Pray whenever you want, but why do you have to force it into a school board meeting? If you can't tell by my name, Christian, I am a Christian. So this isn't coming from a place of, I'm not an atheist. I'm not any other, I'm a Christian. So this isn't, some anti Christian thing. What's the point? There is no need for this to be part of it. It doesn't make any sense. And I know it seems silly, like in the grand scheme of things, like, okay, yeah, go ahead, lead a prayer, whatever. And then let's get to business, like, like what we're supposed to be doing here. It's not like they're gonna take up a ton of time with this thing. So I get it seems kind of silly, and you can just be like, whatever, just do it. But it's what it represents. And there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. Public schools are not supposed to be talking about religion and God and things like that. And I know this isn't a classroom setting, so I do know that there's a difference between a board meeting and the actual classroom setting. Um, my cat agrees. If you can't hear him, he vehemently agrees with me. Um, as I said, the problem is what this represents. It represents, for kids in the school district, even though nothing's being taught to them, this is just a board meeting. It represents that, oh, one religion's the one true religion. That's why we can use our terms in a prayer. And you're making it seem like this is part of daily school life, and it isn't. The people who wanted these prayers and the meetings are also the same people who are yelling about children being indoctrinated in schools, saying certain things can't be taught, things that make certain students uncomfortable, or lying about CRT being taught in schools when it isn't, or getting all up in arms saying kids are being groomed if LGBTQ issues or topics are brought up in classrooms. The same people worried about grooming and indoctrination want to have prayer in a school board meeting. It it doesn't make any sense. Again, I know, not a big deal. Bigger issues in this city, county, state, country, world, but like I said, just what it represents. This is not what's supposed to happen in schools. And again, I'm Christian, so it doesn't bother me that they want to pray and pray to my God. That and that they share beliefs in line with mine in the religious world. The problem is that world is not supposed to be part of schools or the government. And increasingly we're seeing that those lines being blurred on every level. So that's the issue there. All right. That will do it for episode 91. For those who are like, hey, but what about the Murdoch trial? I know. I decided to take the day off from that. Obviously, the trial is very much still going on. But after Alec took the stand last week, the things don't seem quite as explosive or exciting. Things are still going on. You can still check your local news. The local news outlets I highly recommend versus the national news outlets when it comes to covering this case. Um, uh, Barring something crazy happening today that I haven't caught yet or after I record, there really hasn't been anything that I think is too shocking or interesting. Alec's brother, John Marvin, took the stand. He mentioned that he thinks the real killer is still out there, so he is obviously on Alec's side. Outside of that, I don't really think there's been anything too groundbreaking or interesting that has happened, but I encourage you all, if you're interested, to go look that up. I'll certainly provide updates in the future as this trial is starting to wind down. So we will pick things back up on Friday. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I look forward to that next episode. Thanks for listening. If you can, please rate and review this podcast. You should also subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Plus, all that stuff helps me out as well, so I appreciate it. Also, share with anybody who may be interested. You can also support Holy City Center by going to holycitycenter.com/shop or patreon.com/Holy City Center. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins of LMC Sound System for producing each and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And a thank you to Tyler Boone, the musician whose music you hear in each episode as well. Until Friday, good night and good luck.